Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carmen Mazzara. I serve as Executive Director of APSIA, the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs, to which all of your institutions belong. I'm very pleased to welcome you to another one of our career webinars. Today, we will be hearing the great wisdom of an APSIA and Georgetown MSFS alumnus, Andrew Albertson, who serves currently as the Executive Director of Foreign Policy for America. Our topic today is navigating a career in US politics and foreign policy. And so before we turn the floor over briefly to Andrew for an introduction, my question and my challenge to all of you is put something in the chat. Tell me a question that you have burning that brought you here to a conversation today on navigating a career in US politics and foreign policy. So what wisdom could we leave you with by the end of today's session that would really help make sure we share and deliver the content that you're hoping to gain? So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over briefly to Andrew for an introduction, and we'll have a bit of a conversation, and then we'll welcome you all to the floor. So Andrew.
Well, thanks, Carmen. It's so great to be with you in this incredible group. I think the one downside to this format is I'm going to be incredibly interested to know who all of you are. And I know we won't get to do a huge round of introductions, but at least if you do ask a question, maybe just introduce yourself and a little bit about yourself so I can learn a little bit more about this incredible group. So just a quick background on me. As Carmen said, I'm an MSFS alum, and so proud APSIA alum. And I now run the group Foreign Policy for America, and I want to just quickly share with you a little bit. Oh, I see Abby. Hi, Abby. Abby was one of our policy fellows. I'm not gonna get the term right, but not too long ago. So great to see you. So I'll share a little bit about Foreign Policy for America and the work we're doing just as a background. So in 2017, I just come out of some organizing during the 2016 election. And my goal in that was to try to just get my immediate friends to knock on doors and make phone calls and fundraise and do nuts and bolts things that helps win elections. And I recognized through that process that we in the foreign policy community, we really privilege, rightly, but we really kind of prize expertise, kind of think tankery, and to the neglect sometimes of, like I said, the kind of nuts and bolts things that help you win elections, help you gain power, and advance some of these goals that we care about. And I mean, honestly, in 2016, what I kept thinking was, I kept imagining I would bump into the real effort, the real organizing effort that's trying to build a home for people nationally that share a bunch of shared values and want to take action together. And it never happened. And I learned through that process that we just don't have the same infrastructure, organizational infrastructure focused on our issues that almost every other policy sector has set up. And for those of you who know a little bit about advocacy work in other sectors or political engagement in other sectors, there's League of Conservation Voters, national membership-based organization. They equip their members to take action both in on legislation, call your member of Congress, but also to take action on elections. Here's who you ought to support. Here's a champion of ours. How can we help that person get reelected or elected for the first time? In the reproductive health space, there's NARAL and Planned Parenthood Action Fund. In the fight for equality, there's Human Rights Campaign. In the gun space, there's a bunch of groups. Famously on the conservative side, NRA, National Rifle Association. Just saying, it's a bigger group, and they have a lot of different organizational entities, but same kind of idea: national membership-based organization that equips its members to take action in defense of a shared values, both on the legislative side and in terms of political engagement. So in 2017, just realizing that we were kind of missing this, and I think recognizing the cost of that, the members of Congress who are champions on our issues feel like I talked to a couple members, and this one guy in particular was like, I'm doing this out of the goodness of my heart. Nobody cares. He just kind of blurted out. And I was really struck by that. I think we feel the absence of that muscular infrastructure that supports our champions, that fights for our values and gives people a home for those of us who care deeply about the future of American foreign policy. And so we set that up in 2017. So just very quickly, because I've kind of already implied this, we're an advocacy organization. Foreign Policy for America is a 501c4 advocacy organization, which means we can do unlimited lobbying. Secondly, we have a political arm. So we do endorse and then raise money together with our broad national community. We bundle money for great champions for our values in Congress and candidates who are running to be champions in Congress. If they're going to have courage, we're going to have their back. They want to lead on our issues. We want to help them do that. And then the third thing is that community building aspect. We have all sorts of levels of membership within Foreign Policy for America, with the goal that whoever you are, if you're a college student, if you're an extremely wealthy, political donor activist, whoever you are, if you share this concern about the future of American foreign policy, if you recognize the value of America's bipartisan 70-year internationalist tradition and want to defend that and advance it, then we can give you an idea of what's the best way you can take action to make a difference for those shared values. And we are constantly trying to create real community, bring people together, help them get to know each other, help them kind of have a satisfying, enjoyable experience as part of our broader community. So that is a big third leg of the stool. So that's the organization I lead. We set up in 2017. Now we're pretty set up and established, and we're doing great work on all three of those fronts. But it gives me a little bit of an insight into the politics of foreign policy, which I think is incredibly important for us to scrutinize and think about, regardless of what career path you want to be on. And secondly, I think it's incredibly important as a portion of the foreign policy world that I want to attract the most talent I possibly can to. And so I do want to point out the kind of careers that are available for folks that do want to constantly sit at that intersection of politics and foreign policy. So that's a mouthful. I can stop there, but really excited to talk with all of you. And Carmen, happy to answer anything you think would be helpful.
Thanks, Andrew. And actually, let's start there. You talked about a lot of the careers that live at the intersection of the political process in the US and the foreign policy space. And we know of lots of APSIA alumni who had longstanding careers in intelligence or in the field, and then pivoted to becoming elected officials themselves. And we know of plenty of APSIA alumni who have been more behind the scenes in terms of staffers or political appointees or in the foreign and civil service, all of those kinds of spaces. As you think about the many ways into the field of that nexus, are there good on-ramps or places that you think people are best poised to begin if they want to live at that intersection?
Yeah, great question. I have a couple of different things to share there. I'm not sure that either are a really direct answer, but let me share. So first, I would just say, I think that thinking about the politics of foreign policy and trying to gain some experience and understanding of it is important for everybody. I probably recommend that anybody who wanted to, any young professional, any student who's interested in a long-term career in foreign policy, you ought to learn how to write. You ought to learn how to put together a memo, put together an op-ed, understand what to think, kind of a white paper, longer policy recommendations look like. I think you should also try to gain a little bit of experience understanding how politics informs the design and implementation of our foreign policy. If you don't, I think you're just missing an important chunk that would help you out throughout your career. So that is aside, that you're asking for career tracks that are more directly longer term and at that intersection. So let me lay out a few. First and most obviously, some of you have thought about public service your whole life. You've looked around at the congressional representatives in your area, and you asked yourself whether running for public office is a valuable way to serve your country. And it is. I think it's incredibly important. It's also incredibly hard, and not everybody has the skill set for that. But I would challenge everybody to consider running for public office as one route that your career can take. And there are specific things you can do to kind of set yourself up more or less effectively for that longer term path. Second career that you can pursue there's two other ones where you're basically backing up as the principal who themselves ran for public office. So number one, you can work on the Hill as a legislative staff member whose job it is to think in terms of the political interests of the member of Congress in terms of foreign policy or whatever your portfolio might be. So you're thinking about the political interest in this member's personal office, but you're filtering that through your expertise of foreign policy. And it's an interesting way to kind of learn the specific nitty-gritty foreign policy issues, but that is a track you can take and back up an elected official. Second way where you can back up an elected official is on the campaign side. So you want to think about if you really enjoy organizing and communicating with people, if you really enjoy winning support for ideas and for principled individuals who have thrown their hat in the ring and want to run for elected office, being a campaign manager, being a political staffer, even being just like a field organizer, there's all sorts of routes you can take that take you down that campaign track. And there are wonderful people I know who want to go into international affairs and they enjoy sort of scratching that international affairs itch even through their life as a campaign manager and political operative. So that's another way you can support a principals or leaders who are leading on these issues. And then the last one I would introduce is working in an advocacy organization. Now, there's not been in the past politically engaged advocacy organizations, politically minded, muscular, lobby shops, advocacy organizations in our space like there is in every other policy sector. But now there is in Foreign Policy for America, and there are a couple others that take that same kind of politically minded approach to their issues. Council for a Livable World in the nuke space, J Street and APAC, obviously on Israel and a variety of related issues. And there are a couple others that are kind of more politically driven advocacy organizations. So those are your paths. And the question you asked, Carmen, is like how to get down that path. What are the first steps? I think any of those routes offer you, an on-ramp. And maybe not running for elected office yourself initially, but there are great entry-level opportunities at advocacy organizations on the Hill and on campaigns, all of which could help you either gain a little bit of experience or a toehold down that path.
So with that note, our students on the line are from all over, and an unpaid internship on the Hill, delightful though it may be, may not be a possibility that's open to everyone. Can you talk about what might happen locally in other communities outside the Beltway that students could have access to that are also pathways in?
Yeah, sure. Are internships on the Hill still unpaid? Because if they are, that's something we could all work on for sure.
The pay our interns folks are fiercely fighting on that front, but some of them are and a lot of them aren't though.
I saw Representative Castro just put together a bill to push for state to pay their interns, which is insanely, backward situation to be in, but good that he's pushing on that. So things to do in the rest of the country that are steps forward. I mean, again, I think, you can kind of find yourself in any of those three buckets. So on the Hill side, some of the most interesting jobs in Congress and the best starting points to really understand how Congress works are in the field offices where you're doing constituent casework, constituent relations all day long. I really regret that I actually didn't do one of those roles at some point in my career, because I think that is where the rubber hits the road. It's just, how can I solve your problem? What does your problem relate to? Great, let us go after it. And I think that is sort of like the stepping stone of our representative democracy. It is an incredibly interesting place to be. And I know I was just speaking to somebody the other day who was doing that work for Senator Feinstein, and then her next step was doing organizing on behalf of a larger foreign policy related nonprofit. And so I think that's one option. On the campaign side, obviously there are congressional campaigns. There are also state senator races. There are also well, I'm focused on the congressional ones because that gives you access to like federal policy questions, whereas state senator, local elected, statewide elected, not necessarily. But there are congressional campaigns everywhere around the country. And to the extent you can work early on in your career on one of those, it's an amazing experience. I did both. So I worked on a presidential, like my basically first job out of Congress after I came back from overseas. And then not long after that, I worked in a congressional campaign. And those are fascinating, irreplaceable experiences that I highly encourage everybody to try to do at some point in your life. And then the advocacy organization, I mean, that is really the challenge. I mean, there really aren't enough national, serious foreign policy advocacy organizations that are politically engaged. Now, there are lots of different groups around the country, and I think to a certain extent, they're doing politically relevant things. There are a lot of organizations that focus primarily on diaspora organizing and have some foreign policy aspect to them. There are groups that are, you know, organizing around environmental or other issues that should probably be more cognizant of the foreign policy implications of, you know, and connections of what they're doing, and you could help add that. So there probably are those on-ramps too, just not as much of them as I wish.
And on a related note to that, obviously there's only a limited number of folks who formally sit on committees with the term foreign affairs or foreign policy defense in their title. Do you think there is viability to those representatives and senators who don't sit on foreign affairs committees to connect foreign policy experience? And if so,
Sure.
what are the catchphrases or the common terms dart that students can use to clearly draw those connections?
To clearly draw in terms of like their resume and seeking those jobs, or like in the function of the job? Sorry.
In terms of the skill set they'd have as an international affairs graduate student or master's graduate, what those folks might need.
Well, every member of Congress is going to have a foreign policy LA. There's maybe a couple of distinctions. I mean, one is how much money are they investing in that position? How junior is it versus how senior is it? The other is like, do they have other portfolios? Like members that care less about the issue might dual hat defense and foreign policy. Members that really don't care about the issue are going to like dual hat foreign policy with like health and education or something that's just like broader. But I actually think that the members who are not on the key committees create really important opportunities, really great opportunities also. There's a little bit of a trade-off. The trade-off comes in where you might have a lot of autonomy as a relatively young person with the foreign policy LA responsibilities for a member who's not really on the committee. And that's like a great opportunity. I know another just young professional I was talking to recently, another one of our former fellows, he went to work for a member who was on appropriations, but really didn't care that much about foreign policy. Well, he's kind of moved up the ranks, which quickly handed the foreign policy portfolio. Now he's running the foreign policy portfolio for a member who has pretty significant seniority on the appropriations committee and is doing like enormous things. So he has a lot of autonomy, even as a relatively young guy. What he doesn't have is a lot of mentorship because there aren't really well-informed people that are mentoring above him and managing above him. So he's kind of got to figure it out on his own. I would just say that creates a huge number of opportunities for those foreign policy LA jobs or legislative correspondent jobs, just a step below, sort of a research assistant in the office job. But what it implies is you got to know yourself. Are you somebody who thrives where you're sort of making something out of nothing and you're your own boss? Or are you somebody who thrives based on mentorship and you learn constantly from good mentorship and management and you will benefit from that? And that's where I would think, you know, it sort of implies which of those opportunities might suit you best early on.
And for folks who may not know, there's some really good free services that'll drop LA internship on all sorts of opportunities on both the House and the Senate side into your inbox every week. And you can just sign up and it's a free service that the House and the Senate both provide. And they also post a lot of that on social media too.
And I should just say, I've mentioned LA and LC maybe I should just tell you my like bizarro career path, which didn't follow
And
any of these.
translate, please. Translate the terms.
Translate the LCLA? Sure. Yeah. So LA is legislative advisor. I think sometimes offices have legislative assistant and advisor, but anyways, LA. That is the main person who has responsibility for the foreign policy portfolio at LA or in there's also a military advisor. Sometimes people have a specific defense or military legislative advisor to cover a slightly different batch of issues. That person reports to the legislative director, who oversees all the different policy aspects of a congressional office. So legislative director, legislative advisor. Down below that is sort of a research associate type job. That also, one of the things you do is you write in the voice of your boss all correspondence on your issue. And so that's called the legislative correspondent. But what it really is where you like cut your teeth as a research and writer and prove to a broader audience that you can step up in responsibility. And below that is the staff assistant. So my first job in DC, I ran around Capitol Hill until someone gave me an internship. And then the chief of staff liked me enough to sort of shop me around to get a staff assistant job. Or I think I walked around and harassed people enough until someone hired me as a staff assistant with my chief of staff firm backing. And that was great. I worked for Shelley Berkeley. She's on the Foreign Affairs Committee. She's also like one of the wildest people that have ever served in Congress. So that was a hilarious experience. She represented Las Vegas. So just think creatively. She was a fascinating woman. At the same time, I was trying to help start a nonprofit that was born out of a student group at Georgetown. And I signed up thinking it was a nonprofit I wanted to volunteer for, and it wasn't. It was kind of a student group. So I tried to give them some advice, and I was simultaneously, so I was trying to give them advice, but I would like end up, how did that work? Yeah, they asked me to, so I started giving them advice. At the same time, then I got a job working for the Truman National Security Project as their like third employee that they had ever hired. And so I was dual hatted as the membership director and the legislative person. And I was running two congressional working groups for Steve Israel. So I had like an insanely broad, that made no sense. But anyways, that was like what you do when it's like the third hire you've ever made as an organization. And I applied to and said I'd go to grad school, and the nonprofit I helped start, or I helped figure out how to get set up and registered and set up as a nonprofit. It's the Project on Middle East Democracy. And they came to me and said, hey, would you be the first executive director of this organization? And I stupidly was like, so we'll take the direction that I've been advocating for. And they're like, yeah, you'll be in charge. Like, so I'll win the argument. Like, yeah, you'll win the argument. Like, great, I'll do it. That's great. Not thinking that like the horrible idea to decide to lead a nonprofit that's like just founding and starting up while you're going to grad school. So I definitely discourage everybody from doing that. Take full advantage of your grad school experience. Don't try to start a nonprofit while you're there. But I did. And so I ran POMED for the first 3 years, which included like a year after I graduated or so, and made like a pretty bad impression on all of my amazing professors like Steve Heidemann and Mark Grossman, and the embarrassment I'm still shaking off today. And I went from there to work for USAID, and then long story short, worked for a development contractor. And I don't know if any of you are thinking about this route, but I hate the development contracting space. I think it is soul sucking and completely unnecessarily so, but just does not have a well-developed sense of professional ethics that you might expect from an industry where 100% of the people go into it because they care about it like deeply and want to make the world a better place. So I didn't do that for very long. At the same time, I did this organizing in 2016 and got really sucked into that and started to realize that I quit my job for a variety of reasons. Did this organizing, started consulting on my own behalf, like with other development groups and nonprofits, but then started realizing that it was really important to set up this group, Foreign Policy for America, and that would fill a necessary gap. And so after trying to figure out every other way that I could avoid setting it up myself, I went ahead and did that. So anyways, not a career path to emulate, but that's my background.
What I heard you say, though, were a number of skills that it sounds like are highly transferable and the kinds of things students should build. So I obviously heard you say writing, memo writing, op-ed writing, white paper writing. I heard you talk about research and the importance of being able to do that. I heard you talk about the importance of fundraising, for those of you who are not independently wealthy, at least. Winning support for ideas, building things, and networking.
Yeah.
Were the key things that I heard you talk about as laying the groundwork for your current success. Of those, well, I guess my first question is, are there things that students should think about building that they're going to need to live in this space to be effective?
Right.
And then I'll ask you my next question.
Yeah. And let me, as we're also gathering questions, I need to plug in my laptop. So what I'm going to do is just turn my video off for just a second here while I scramble. So I didn't jot down every single one of those different skills that you were talking about, which, so you can pull them back up if you want. But, I think the number one thing, first of all, yes, I think everybody working in foreign policy, you all know, you need to figure out not just how to write, but like how to learn an issue and research and be mentored and kind of humbly understand a whole policy area and demonstrate your ability to think critically and seriously about, with deference to other people that have worked on this, on a small issue before anyone's really going to trust you to work on a gradually larger issue. And that's pretty much true of like any foreign affairs career. So I'm always trying to encourage people early in their career, go through the practice of trying to write an op-ed. It's a very learnable skill. You do have to like study the structure and the bone structure and practices of like what makes for a good op-ed. But going through that, you need to learn kind of who else has written on this topic. How do you like demonstrate that you're seeking feedback? How can you demonstrate that you want to be mentored? How can you demonstrate and like give deference to people that have gone before you? Be transparent about the problems with your idea, also be compelling. All that is what I mean by learning how to write and research. It is broad and it has to do with people and as much as like writing skill. Another thing that I mentioned in a couple different ways is organizing. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of political work comes down to tying together. It comes down to solving a collective action problem, basically. You need to work in tandem with a large pool of people that share a common perspective or interest. And you need to help them see their connections between others that share their common values or interests. You need to listen to them. You need to engage and mobilize and build enthusiasm within them. And you need to have the kind of analytical vision and wherewithal to help solve their problems across the board together. And all of that we kind of boil down into organizing, which is a really like people-centric thing. And I would just say that like if you are considering a career in this path, you should try to find some opportunity to do real organizing early in your career. The best way to do that is through a political campaign, but there's certainly like nonprofit organizing sort of jobs that are great experiences as well. If you don't love people and community, it's going to be hard to do this work. Fundraising. Fundraising is, if you like organizing, and you're passionate about an issue, it's not that hard to fundraise. I was going to say it's easy, which is maybe overstating it, but let me just share with you how I think about fundraising and how I try to teach our team that does a ton of fundraising, not just for the organization, but for political candidates. I never want to go out to someone and say, hey, Daniel, first thing I can ask you is, will you give money to this candidate? You don't know that person. I barely know you, but will you give to them? It's just not a great plan. It won't be effective. It's also totally inappropriate for our relationship. What is much better is if I say, Daniel, tell me, I'm super interested to get to know you. I want to know where you're from, what region of the country, what state, what area. I want to know what your top policy issues are that you care about. I'm also pretty interested in what motivates you. Are you the kind of person who is motivated by being part of a community? Or are you motivated by the direct kind of career benefits from taking action? Are you motivated just intrinsically by doing the most amount of good that you can? Because people are different. Now, if we've already had that conversation and I know you, then I have another opportunity, which is to come to you and say, Daniel, there's this candidate running from your state who just happens to care more than almost anybody about this issue. I really think because I already know that you want to give politically, I really think this is exactly the kind of person who you should meet and support. And I'd love for you to join this event because I think it solves your problem. And so fundraising at the end of the day is helping people to achieve the goals that they've already set out. And that's what we try to do with our communities, get to know everybody well enough that we know what goals they have. And then we provide a service by helping them to do that together with a larger group of people. And it is, it's a great experience. And I really enjoy doing that because it helps a community that shares a common set of values and interests to act together when otherwise they wouldn't have been able to. And we are the connective tissue. The other thing is, I think we devote ourselves with such passion and commitment to actually being impactful, being efficient, being serious about our work, that knowing that, how impactful we actually are and how good at what we are doing, is, and what a good apples to apples comparison it is to other people's work, it is also pretty easy for us to tell people the best way you can invest if you're trying to support advocacy or policy goals is to support us as an organization. Now, I say all that to kind of lower the barrier of entry a little bit and in a very, very, very fast way. But just to say fundraising is important. It's also something that I expect, not everyone is set up to do, but most people can do it. It takes a kind of a turn from what we imagine as fundraising, which is just kind of randomly going out to everybody you can think of and asking them for money, to an approach to fundraising, which is much more rooted in community and relationships and a commitment to impact that you're really proud of. So what was that? Writing, organizing, fundraising. What else did you say?
You talked about
for an idea,
building things.
Yeah, two other things on there I think are important: building things and networking. So networking is obvious. You are at this unique and special time in your life where you can ask almost anyone to have an organizing, or an informational Zoom coffee with you. And almost everyone will say yes to you for a couple of reasons. One is because somebody said yes to them before and they recognize that they owe it to the next generation to say yes. And two, because people who are mentors benefit in concrete and predictable ways from having a network of mentees. And so everybody, is looking around for rising stars that they can help take the next step in their career. So now I can't do that. I can't just randomly email whoever and say, hey, I really want to take a career that's similar to yours. And you don't really know what my future is like, but I really want to succeed in exactly the path that you've laid down, and I would love to ask you a few questions, and I promise to be efficient with your time, and I've done the research to do that. I can't do that, but you all can, and it's like this magical window that you need to take full advantage of and like devote way more of your time than you are currently devoting to having those informational coffees and then committing to stay in touch with people over time. For example, when I was like straight back from Guatemala after I was there for a couple of years out of college, wrote Susan Rice, and I was like, you care a lot about fragile states. You're the only person who cares about fragile states, and I have a lot of thoughts about how that should be the center of American grand strategy. And like, would you be so kind as to like sit and chat with me? And I really wish I would have like made more of an effort to she did. We had a great conversation. It was wonderful. She was like as wonderful and heartfelt and like severe as she still is today. And I wish desperately that I would have like maintained that relationship better than I did, because like years later I had to remind her that we had that coffee. But if you should definitely do the networking, and you should definitely like have a systematic plan to maintain relationships over time. Last thing is building things. It is a skill and probably more like an inbuilt characteristic that you need to know about yourself to like build something out of nothing. And it takes like vision. It takes like, I don't know, something bordering on insanity, where lots of people tell you that it's a bad idea and it won't work out, and you still like plow forward, which is probably not a super constructive trait in a lot of lines of work. But if you want to like start a nonprofit or build something entrepreneurially, or run for political office, it is helpful to like have that that desire and capacity to build something out of nothing. I don't know if that's a skill you can gain, except like if it is a personality trait, then go ahead and try to harness that and practice that over time, because it certainly was easier to start a nonprofit the second time than it was the first, so some practice I'm sure is helpful.
And those are also great skills that students can gain on campus, whether it is the advocacy component, the fundraising piece, the building piece.
So that is absolutely true. And I'm so glad you said that, because like I am in the position of looking for entrepreneurship, and like the ability to like spin something out of nothing, the ability to like organize large groups of people and to have success. And we recently hired someone. I mean, this actually happens the last couple of times we've hired someone, we found that on their college leadership part of their resume, like, because there's just not that many jobs where you can like really do that. There certainly aren't that many jobs you can do at a young, like part of your career where you're like leading large groups of people, coordinating them, keeping them happy, solving their problems, and like building something from a small thing to a bigger thing. And so I highly encourage you to like, if that sounds appealing as a career path, then make sure you check that box and perform effectively, because not only did we like find that on their resume, we figured out a way to like check with students in their network whether they were well regarded and respected and had success in building like from where they started to where they ended.
It's that relationship management. You never know who's going to come back in your life. So again, folks, we have a little bit more time. If there's something burning you don't want to leave this conversation without, please put it in the chat box. Otherwise, you got to keep listening to me. Andrew, one of the questions I get all the time is there are students who feel very deeply about particular issues or parts of the political spectrum and want to stay always in that part of the political spectrum. But there's other students who just want to do good work. And in this highly partisan or highly polarized environment, how do you recommend students navigate the depth of working only with think tanks or only with politicians on one side of the spectrum compared to trying to balance the political components? Like how do you deal with a highly partisan, building a career in such a highly partisan space?
Yeah, that's a good question. The first thing I would just say is, do your homework. I mean, I think, it's kind of bizarre. Like you all are incredibly successful. You're at incredible, serious university programs, you put a lot of time and energy into researching lots of things in your life. I think the first thing is do your homework on exactly what issues you'd be working on and from what angles, either in that congressional office or in that nonprofit. And then I guess giving the exact opposite advice, like I just don't overthink it in the sense of like, don't try to game out 3 steps from now in your career. Try to figure out how to do something that you're passionate about and feel strongly about right now. And I think that's probably the best thing you can do, because number one, I think that's going to be the most important question you're going to be asked, several years from now. Like, how exactly did you make the decision that you wanted to dive in on this issue area, or, in defense of this person's policy positions? Number two, you're probably going to do your best work and you're going to be happy. And I think that's probably just a first order goal. So, I would try to drill down into the specific issues and stances that you'd be working on and make sure you understand and are excited about them. I think the rest is will work itself out. And I say a lot of that because I don't want to discourage you from taking inherently political positions early on in your career. I just don't think you should worry too much about any future theoretical consequences in the future. And in fact, I think it will benefit you regardless of what path you take. If you're a foreign service officer, like the least political job you can take, or an intelligence officer, it's not going to be a ding in your resume to have taken a job where you think politically or understand the politics of foreign policy design and implementation. It's not. Like, no one's going to criticize you for that. And in fact, it will almost certainly help you to do your job better in some future foreign affairs agency. The other thing I'll just say, though, is just to acknowledge that this is a really polarized moment, where the views of the different parties are about as far apart as they've ever been on the issues that we're talking about right now. So POMA, the first nonprofit I helped start, it was a C3, it was a 501c3, which is to say, we provide facts, we provide analysis, we try to provide that to everybody that might be listening. And we would say, we have a responsibility to try to prevent our issues from becoming a political football. You don't want them to be polarized. Now, there are a few issues that are still like that. I think democracy and human rights can be one of those. International development can be one of those. Global health policy to a certain extent. It's becoming kind of a short list, though. Trade, I think, can be on there. But it really is a short list. And what I would say is we should all be cognizant of just that reality. Don't beat yourself up for the fact that we do have this polarized moment. But do try to approach your issue with the greatest integrity you possibly can, and try to avoid unnecessary polarization on the issues. Wherever we can foster collaboration on the issue itself and leave politics behind, that's a good thing. Wherever we can find coordination across party lines, you shouldn't change your position or your beliefs in search of this phantom bipartisanship. But where you can find it, that's a good thing, And we should all be trying to do what little we can to kind of keep addressing the issues as they are, keep the polarization out of it to the greatest extent we can.
Thank you. Alice, please.
Oh, sure. Thank you. So I have a question regarding, the organization. First of all, I really believe that American foreign policy starts at home. And so I think, especially under today's environment, my focus, my background is actually in venture capital and consulting. transition into foreign policy. And based on what happened in the election recently, I'm making my step to Georgia, trying to change or making positive impacts in Georgia first, while I'm getting my national security clearance.
That's great.
And so my question is, one of my very close friends, she's also a fellow mid-career Master of Public Administration student at the Harvard Kennedy School. That's where I am right now as well. And so she is planning on running for office in Georgia. And part of our plan on helping the community have the well respected political representation for the people there. And so my question is, I'm fully in support on her election. My question is regarding on the work of the FP Action Network for the PAC. And so when you select candidates, what are some criteria, and what, like, of course I read your values, and and I'm just curious, what are some qualifications that or characteristics you're looking for to support a candidate, and how to be in touch with the organization to do so? Thank you.
Yeah, well, just to be in touch with me, I dropped my email address down there, and Carmen, feel free to share that with anybody else. Happy to be a resource. In some cases, I'll probably point you to somebody else on my team. If there's for some things where they can give better advice, but and this is actually one of them probably, but so we love endorsing challengers, and be thrilled to be in touch with your friend. Happy to connect. We endorse based on 3 criteria. So alignment with our values. So are you going to kind of vote in favor of internationalist, diplomacy first, foreign policy, that bipartisan 70-year tradition that we're trying to defend? Second is commitment to lead on the issues, which is to say, who is the woman? Is it Caroline Bordeaux? Am I getting her name right, in Georgia? And she's great. She actually she is a PhD in public administration and works internationally. And we're like, we want you desperately in the Foreign Affairs Committee. You would be so great. You'd be like a budget person, and we need those. And she's worked in specific countries that would be really helpful. But she doesn't. She wants to focus on other issues. And so we're like, well, listen, we really want to focus on people that want to lead on our issues, want to introduce legislation that we care about, want to be in the key committees. So we couldn't endorse her. So that's the second criteria for us, is really commitment to lead on our issues, be our champion. And the third thing for us is viability. So, we want to point our members and our donors towards races where candidates really can show a clear path to victory. They've thought it out. They've got a plan. It's a winning plan. With you in venture capital, it's, the same thing. You want to invest in winning strategies, and you're not going to stress out too much about places, business plans that are not going to work out. We also don't endorse campaigns where people are running away with it. So it's just in that contested range that we focus all of our attention on. So all of which is to say, we'd love to talk with your friend. When candidates are up for endorsement, they fill out a questionnaire. Then we have a staff interview with them and go over all the issues and their plan for winning. And then we do a final board call with them, with our board of directors and members of our finance committee.
Perfect. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, great to talk with you. Yeah.
It sounds, Andrew, like evaluation and the ability to understand information is also a key part of this, as you look at candidates and try to gauge their seriousness, gauge their competitiveness.
I would say, I think, yes, that's true. It's true for sure, and true for a lot of things. But the key is, it's not impossible to do what we're doing. It's not that hard, actually. It's just that somebody ought to do it as a service to a much broader range of members in our community that obviously all want to take action and want to make a difference and are looking for ways to do that, and looking for ways to do it in an efficient and coordinated way. So what we're doing is not rocket science. It's just somebody has to do it as a service to the broader community. So we do have that fellow who put together the 600-line spreadsheet, and we do have our political associate who's managing outreach to hundreds of campaigns and candidates. And yeah.
Thank you. Eric, your question, please.
Hello, my name is Eric Jenkins. I'm a grad student at Penn State studying international affairs. And so I asked the first question there about how to break into the field. I've kind of done a lot of the things that you mentioned. I've ran for office. I've worked for campaigns for the last 7 or so years on the local, state, and national level. I've sort of been, the only thing I haven't done, I've interned in the private sector, but I'm having a really hard time getting into the public sector. A lot of, and really it's just a general thing. I'm trying to almost be anywhere just to get into the door. And it's really kind of tough. I've been on USA Jobs. I've worked in DC, but I worked in DC for a private sector company, and I did a lot of networking with people in the space, people who've worked in the State Department, presidential appointees, and things like that. But whenever I apply, I feel like there's something missing, and I'm not quite sure what that may be. I listed a lot of things, like you said, on my resume, about leadership, leading large groups of people, etc. But it's just been tough for me. Is there anything that you think that where I could maybe fill in, or any advice there, you think?
Yeah, well, shoot me an email and maybe we can have a longer conversation, Eric, because I'd love to chat with you more and just be a little bit more helpful than I can be in the next couple of minutes. But I should say also my fiance is a Penn State alum and a super big Penn State homer. So but I think it is a little bit tough sometimes to, sometimes you have to demonstrate, and it takes a little bit of effort to demonstrate to people how working on campaigns or doing some of that work is translatable to working in a federal government agency, State Department. And it shouldn't be. And I was very fortunate to work in an office at USAID that totally got the connection, but that's a unique place where I was like, well, I think this stuff is really applicable. And they're like, oh, no, we totally understand that. Actually, we hire people like you. But that's the Office of Transition Initiatives at USAID, which is a bizarre sort of outcast grouping of the broader aid agency. So anyways, the point is, I'd be happy to chat with you a little bit more. I think it does take a little selling, and there might be a hop step in between where you need to kind of land somewhere else that's easier to translate from where you are to where you want to go, and then go from there to state. But yeah, send me a note and love to chat more. And yeah,
for sure. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Speaking of bipartisanship, by the way, my favorite representative in Pennsylvania is Brian Fitzpatrick, who's this incredibly courageous, serious, civil guy who has a superpower for staying under the radar and just voting in smart ways. So of all the people local to you, Eric, I encourage you to try to go and help and work for, it'd be Brian Fitzpatrick.
For sure. I'll give it a look.
We have just a few minutes left, folks. Andrew, that actually leads to my next question, which is what should people be reading, watching, following, doing to make sure they're hip to the folks who are good at staying under the radar, but are really good on these questions?
On these questions. I mean, the same advice everybody gives you. You should read The Economist. It's the easiest way to just stay up to speed on global events, period. And it's hard to do that. The other thing actually is our daily news brief is probably the single best resource you could subscribe to, because we do have this congressional approach to foreign affairs news, and we send it out every day, and it's 5 stories, a long read with policy recommendations and a tweet. So go to our website, sign up for our daily news brief. It's definitely, that is without question the best resource if you want to think about this stuff from this angle every day. Foreign Policy Magazine, I think, does a great job. They have a lot of different articles, and I think they but yeah, I don't know. That's not very unique advice, except to sign up for our daily.
Happy to let you put a plug in for FP4A. I guess my final question before we have to wrap up, and everyone, Andrew has kindly agreed to let us record this presentation. So if you weren't able to take notes furiously as he was talking, it will live on the APSIA YouTube page, and I'll share that link with you afterwards. My last question is, what do you wish you had known as a graduate student that would have well positioned you, or would well position our colleagues here to live at that intersection of politics and foreign policy?
What do I wish I would have known? I guess I would just say that I stumbled into a lot of the things that you should do, and just purely by accident. You know, I think it was invaluable for me to work on a campaign early on. Campaigns are sort of like traveling abroad, where people are going to tell you do it early in your life because it's really hard, and that's good advice. You know, so I think that's one thing that I'm glad I stumbled into, and people should proactively advise you to do. What else? I mean, I think a lot of the skills that people think are intuitive and just have to do with your personality or innate skills are really just things you need to learn. Like, I had learned and worked at being a better writer. I think I learned over time how to organize people and help them solve problems collectively, solve collective action problems. So just, if you do want to go down this path, I would just try to break out some of the skills and habits that you might otherwise assume are just inherent or not, and figure out good experiences and mentors that are going to help you learn those skills. But all very doable. And then if you want to work at Foreign Policy for America, send me an email.
And with that, I hope you all will join me in thanking Andrew for all of his wisdom, and seek him out. Clearly, he's open for business on LinkedIn and email and everything else. So, and Abby endorses him. So
Hey.
can't go wrong with that. Andrew, do you want to briefly mention the Fellows Program with the 2 minutes left?
Yeah, we do have a great Fellows Program. We take it really seriously as an exercise for people to learn and build their skill sets, and to go on and do great things. And as Abby knows, we try to make that like a lifetime commitment. So we want to stay in touch and to be helpful down the road. So I'd love for you all to look at that as an opportunity and apply. And it's really competitive. But if you are interested in that intersection of foreign policy and politics, I think it's a special opportunity. Abby, did I get that right?
I think so, yes. Andrew still responds to my emails when I'm following up to bother him for things months later. So can confirm it is a dedicated commitment.
Although I want to hear the outcome of that report you were working on.
It's still very much in draft form, but come back to me in April and I'll have a better
with our future ambassador to Beijing, maybe. We'll see.
We'll see. We'll see.
All right. Sounds good.
May I ask a last minute question?
Actually,
sure.
With the time that we have, I'm going to ask you, Alice, Andrew kindly shared his email. So I'm going to ask you can follow up with him later. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Thank you in particular, Andrew, for all of your great wisdom. And we look forward to seeing you all in the halls of power and the halls of foreign policy. And thank you. And we look forward to seeing you also at future APSIA career webinars. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Carmen. Great to meet you all.
Thank you all for